On a warm July night, 16-year-old Evan Miller lay awake in bed. The windows were open, the curtains breathing softly with the wind. He wasn't expecting anything strange. Harrow Creek was always quiet. Too quiet. At exactly 12:14 a.m., he heard it. Footsteps in the cornfield behind his house. Not the wind, not an animal. Heavy, slow, measured. Step, step, step. Evan froze. His house sat right next to the field. He could see the tops of the corn plants swaying gently in the dark. Then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Until something tall rose above the corn, just a silhouette, just for a moment, and sank back down again. Evan didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, Evan's neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, came knocking. Her voice was shaking. "Have you seen Baxter?" she asked. Her old beagle had vanished the night before. Evan hadn't, but something in her eyes told him she already knew the truth. That evening, Evan went outside with a flashlight. The cornfield pressed up against the yard like a solid wall. He whispered to himself, "Baxter?" The beam of light shook in his hand. Then he saw it. A trail through the corn, as if something huge had parted the stalks and walked straight through. Evan stepped inside. The corn muffled every sound except his own heartbeat. The deeper he moved, the colder the air became. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He found Baxter's collar snagged on a stalk. No fur, no blood, just the collar, and a single footprint in the dirt. Large, deep, too long to be human, too narrow to be an animal. Something else had been here, and it was close. That night, Evan sat at his window, watching the cornfield under the moonlight. At 12:14 a.m., right on time, the shape returned. It rose slowly above the corn, tall, impossibly tall, like a thin, crooked scarecrow lifting itself from the earth. It stood there, unmoving, watching his house. Evan backed away from the glass, but the shadow leaned, bending at an unnatural angle as if it could see him through the walls. Then, step, step, step. It moved again, circling the house, dragging something through the dirt behind it. Evan hid under his bed, hands over his ears. The dragging sound stopped right beneath his window. Something scratched the siding, then whispered, "I see you." By morning, Evan was done being quiet. He went to Sheriff Dalton, who had lived in Harrow Creek his entire life. The sheriff listened, but didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't call Evan crazy. Instead, he asked one question. What time? When Evan answered 12:14, the sheriff's face drained of color. He locked his office door, and then he told Evan the truth. In this town, every 12 years, for 9 nights straight, something comes out of the corn. Something old. Something that doesn't belong to this world. Evan whispered, "What does it want?" Sheriff Dalton looked at him with a fear he tried to hide. "It wants someone to follow it back into the field." That night, Evan didn't sleep. He sat on the floor with a kitchen knife in hand. 12:14 a.m. Silence. 12:17. Silence. 12:21. Knock. 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 At the back door. His parents were asleep. No neighbors came this late. Evan stepped slowly toward the door. The knocking grew louder, and then something spoke from the other side, not in a voice, in a chorus, as if dozens of whispers were layered together. "Let me in, Evan." The doorknob twitched, scratched, turned. Evan lunged forward and locked it, but the entire door frame shook as if something enormous pressed against it. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Silence again. A silence worse than the knocking.
The next morning, the sheriff found a line of animal bones arranged in a perfect circle behind Evan's yard. Birds, rabbits, something larger, maybe a deer. But what chilled him most was the center of the circle. A fresh, human footprint. Bare, deep, facing the cornfield, as if waiting. Evan's mother insisted they leave town. Bags were packed. The car was loaded. But at 11:58 p.m., Evan realized something. The thing wasn't after his family. It was after him.
Midnight. Harrow Creek held its breath. At 12:14, the corn parted, and the thing stepped into the yard. Tall, bone-thin, limbs too long, head tilted at a broken angle, skin pale like wet paper. Its eyes were just holes, but they were locked on Evan. It raised one arm and pointed to the cornfield. A command, a summons. The sheriff arrived, shouting for Evan to run, but the thing moved faster than anything that tall should move. It crossed the yard in 3 impossible strides. Evan felt a hand clamp around his wrist. Ice, pain, darkness. He was dragged toward the rows of corn. But suddenly the sheriff fired. The creature shrieked, and the corn shook, and it released Evan. Not because of the bullet, but because the sun was rising. The thing hissed, its body folding, shrinking, collapsing into itself, and slipped backward into the field, just as the first rays of morning light cut across the land. The sheriff whispered, "It's over, for now."
After the creature retreated at sunrise, the sheriff forced Evan into his truck and drove him to the station. Evan watched the cornfield shrinking behind them, yet he felt something watching back. Inside the station, Sheriff Dalton locked the door and lowered his voice. "Evan, it didn't leave because we scared it. It left because daylight burns it." Evan whispered, "Then it'll come back tonight." The sheriff shook his head, fear tightening his jaw. "No, not just tonight. It will come for the next 8 nights until the cycle ends, and it will be stronger each night." Evan stared at him. What happens if it completes the cycle? The sheriff exhaled slowly. Someone disappears forever. Outside, thunder rolled across a cloudless sky, a warning from the corn. That evening, Evan tried to rest, but sleep refused to come. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered. Static. Then a whisper layered with many voices. "Come back, Evan. You left something in the field." The call cut off. He checked the time. 12:14 a.m.
His bedroom light flickered. From the window, he saw something impossible. The corn was bending inward, forming a spiral. A path. A path meant for him. Evan backed away, breath shaking. But the spiral kept forming, as though the field itself were calling his name. Sheriff Dalton arrived moments later, pounding on the door. "Evan, get in the truck, now!" As they sped away from the house, the cornfield rippled violently behind them, as though something enormous moved beneath the stalks. Dalton clenched the wheel. "It's not just hunting anymore. It's angry." They parked near the abandoned grain mill, the only place in Harrow Creek with metal walls thick enough to block whatever the creature used to track its victims. The sheriff pulled out a thick leather journal, cracked with age. "This belonged to my grandfather. He survived the last cycle, barely." Inside were sketches, tall silhouettes, strange symbols, and a warning written in desperate handwriting. "If the corn calls your name, do not answer. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. If you see its shadow, run." Evan looked up. "What is it? What does it want?" The sheriff swallowed hard.
The mill was silent, too silent. Then, step, step, step. The footsteps approached from outside. Evan and the sheriff pressed their backs against the metal wall. Step, step, stop. The creature was right outside. A long shadow slid across the floor like ink. Then the mill's metal walls groaned, bending inward, as if something with enormous strength pressed its hands against the steel. A low whisper seeped through the cracks.
"Ivan, you cannot hide."
Dalton grabbed Evan's arm. "We run on my signal." The metal wall buckled, screamed, and then it split open. A pale hand reached inside, fingers long enough to scrape the floor. "Run!" They sprinted toward the main road, but the creature was faster. It didn't walk, it glided, its limbs bending like broken branches. The corn parted violently as it chased them, rows collapsing in its wake. The sheriff fired twice. Bullets didn't slow it. They reached a clearing where the cycle always ended. A stone circle, ancient and half-buried. The sheriff turned to Evan. "Listen to me. I can still stop it, but you need to run when I say run, and do not look back." The creature emerged from the corn. Tall, twisted, hungry. Dalton stepped forward. "Take me! Do you hear me? Take me instead!" The creature paused, then, with a voice that echoed inside Evan's skull, "Too late. It has already chosen." It pointed at Evan. Dalton shoved him hard. "Run!"
Evan ran. Branches whipped his face. Cornstalks tore at his clothes. The creature's whisper followed him. "Evan, look behind you." He didn't. He kept running until he burst out onto the road. The sun was rising, faint but enough. He collapsed, gasping. The creature stopped at the edge of the cornfield, shrinking back from the light. Before retreating, it whispered one final sentence. "Next cycle, you will follow willingly." And then it dissolved into the shadows between the rows. Evan looked around. The sheriff was gone. Not a trace left behind. And Harrow Creek had lost another name to the corn.